Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья, меня зовут Дарья, я директор публичной программы Института Strelka. Спасибо большое, что пришли. Мы начнем очень скоро. Сейчас буквально один организационный момент. Если вам лекция будет проходить на английском языке, если вам нужны переводы и наушники для переводов, вы можете взять их у наших коллег вот здесь, вот справа от меня. Спасибо большое.
Добрый вечер. Добрый вечер, меня зовут Оля Полищук, я исполнительный директор Института медиа, архитектуры и дизайна «Стрелка». Спасибо большое, что пришли в последнее воскресенье этого прекрасного лета сюда, для того, чтобы послушать, пожалуй, о том, как, например, мы, как «Стрелка», точно собираемся интеллектуально развиваться следующий год и даже несколько лет. И это презентация нашей образовательной программы, которая всегда была сердцем института и ради чего он, собственно, был 7 лет назад и основан. Потому что «Стрелка» занимается изменением ландшафта российских городов через два инструмента. Это просвещение и образование. Когда мы делаем публичную программу, на которую, я знаю, многие из вас уже были с мая по сентябрь, это все-таки просвещение. Но служит образовательная программа, на которую каждый год мы набираем 30 человек. Немножечко о том, что она междисциплинарная, то есть мы берем на эту программу людей из разных сфер с разным образованием и опытом работы. Вторая часть — это она на английском языке, потому что она, в принципе, международная. Мы берем не только россиян, мы берем людей из разных, собственно, частей этого мира. География всегда непредсказуемая, но это вполне себе международное сообщество. Сроки набора, она будет происходить с 1 февраля. Набор на эту программу уже начался. Начался он непонятно, или вы захотите задать вопрос, там тоже есть строчечка написать нам или связаться с нами, или в конце концов... Для чего мы это делаем? И важно, что она бесплатная, потому что, собственно, мы развиваем человеческий капитал. Нам кажется, что вкладываться в людей, которые потом тот самый контекст изменят, это одна из самых важных, наверное, вещей. Поэтому мы просим на эти 5 месяцев вас не работать и платим вам стипендию 40 тысяч рублей в месяц для того, чтобы люди, которые поступали на программу, могли полностью отдаваться обучению. Поэтому, отвечая на вопрос, можно ли совмещать обучение с работой, нет, нельзя. Это строгое правило, которое мы соблюдаем. И, собственно, в этом году мы изменяем несколько наш, наверное, фокус. Мы смотрим на уровень города не только с точки зрения в области архитектуры и городского планирования, как это было всегда, мы смотрим на нее с технологической точки зрения. И тема этого года называется «The New Normal». Новая норма. Что такое новая норма, нам сегодня подробно очень расскажет человек, ради которого мы здесь собрались, но хочется сказать следующее, что мы все еще смотрим на город как основной топик «Стрелки», тем не менее через призму последних технологических тенденций и с учетом методологии спекулятивного дизайна. И да, пробирайтесь, пожалуйста. Помимо этого, для кого эта программа в таком случае в этом году? Она ориентирована на специалистов также из области архитектуры, урбанистики, цифровых медиа, компьютерных технологий и остальных специалистов, которые так или иначе нашли для себя это интересно. Поэтому если после сегодняшней лекции, после просмотра очень подробного Apply to Strelka вам покажется, что это для вас, подавайтесь, не бойтесь. И, собственно, исключение за Outstanding Results мы часто делаем и по возрасту, и по образованию, и по каким-то другим критериям, которые вы там сможете найти. Важно, что в этом году, помимо наших 2 сегодняшних спикеров, в программе участвуют такие люди, как Лем Янг и Келлер и Стерлинг, и дизайн-бюро MetaHeaven. Ну, не знаю, если вам что-то говорят эти имена, они прекрасны. Если нет, я думаю, что мы сегодня подробнее услышим, почему именно они. А я со своей стороны хочу уже, конечно, перейти к представлению нового программного директора образовательной программы Института «Стрелка». Это Бенджамин Браттон, социолог, известный социолог и теоретик дизайна и медиа, человек, который преподает Visual Arts в Калифорнийском университете в Сан-Диего, где недавно он начал возглавлять такое направление спекулятивного дизайна. А также в 2016 году вышла его книжка «The Stack» в MIT Press. Очень такое томное издание. Не поленитесь, если когда-то будет время на каникулах, например, это прочитать. Книга, которая объясняет, собственно, объясняет очень много чего, но я думаю, что мы сегодня опять же про это услышим чуть подробнее. И первым будет говорить как раз Бенджамин. Но это еще не все. Вторым спикером сегодня будет Лев Манович, человек, которого вы часто и много, и наверняка на Стрелке, но мы перешли из стадии такой публичной программы и лекций уже к серьезным отношениям, и теперь он становится ведущим преподавателем образовательной программы этого года. Что надо знать про Льва? Он известный теоретик диджитал-медиа, одним из первых начавший анализировать то, что происходит в социальных сетях, а также занимающийся, в принципе, очень интересными проектами, например, исследованием Инстаграма, и как раз этому был посвящен лекция в прошлом году здесь. Также автор книги «The Language of New Media» и человек, который возглавляет лабораторию Software Studies Lab. Я думаю, что это достаточно для представления двух этих сегодняшних людей. А формат у нас будет такой. Сначала выступит Бенджамин, затем мы послушаем, как исследование, которое расскажет про New Normal и про себя. А второй частью будет Лев, который расскажет нам про то, как его исследовательская деятельность поможет, собственно, раскрыть тему этого года. И дальше не уходите, пожалуйста, потому что начнется дискуссия между Браттоном и Мановичем. Для чего? Для того, чтобы мы все с вами и получили дополнительные исследования, и уже после этого будет Q&A. Мы стараемся уложиться в положенное час 15 время. Собственно, на этом все. Benjamin, can I give you a microphone and a place? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you very much for coming. In the world, I think, in which we can undertake a project like this, I'm very honored to be here, humbled by the invitation and the challenge. I want to, in my presentation this evening, introduce myself a little bit, talk about the theme of the new normal, what I see as at stake for the research that we're going to undertake. I first want to thank more than a few people who've made this evening possible. First, Varvara Melnikova, director of Strelka, Olga Polishuk, Dasha Shulga, Polina Savanova, Zhenya Pospolova, Gala Dolgovich, the design team, who I had a wonderful time working with so far, Anya Kulichek, Maxim Karalevich, Valya Fetisov, and most of all, Olga Tenesheva, who's been my partner in crime and host for my time here in Moscow. So first, my thanks to them to make this possible. So let me first then introduce a bit about myself, those of you who are less familiar with my work. As Olga mentioned, I'm a professor of visual arts at the University of California, San Diego, which is the southernmost campus in the UC system, home of the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, the Salk Institute, which you see here, as well as Cal IT2 and a number of other places. Its focused research on biotech, neuroscience, Qualcomm was sort of the spin out, and so it's a university that focuses on emerging technologies. It's also right on the border with Mexico, and so the cultural for design and geopolitics, an interdisciplinary research unit on might be. As Olga mentioned, I recently published a big book called The Stack on Software and Sovereignty with MIT Press. It's an extremely very interdisciplinary project. It's meant as a sort of design brief for the age of planetary scale computation. It works with these sort of issues in ways that perhaps some other books tend to be more utopian or dystopian. I think this one is really sort of neither, and hopefully then more useful in its own way. I'll talk a little bit about its argument a bit later on. I also founded the new speculative design major at UC San Diego, which started this year. It's meant to bring artists and designers, scientists and engineering students together to work to reinvent a new vocabulary, vernacular for design, and to work on what is possible for us to work with. The impetus for the program, I think, was well summed up by Liam Young, one of our other faculty, and he wrote, as the economy and the city are being reshaped by new technologies, the future is beginning to become a design project again. The traditional city infrastructure of roads, buildings, and public squares are giving way to ephemeral digital networks, biotechnologies, cloud computing connections. And at a time of crisis, we need to once again be exploring big visions and bold gestures. It's not the time to retreat. And so as we imagine speculative cities of the imminently possible, we begin to enact alternate forms of spatial practice, whereby architects, designers, and artists can again play a critical role in exploring the implications and consequences of emerging technologies. Fiction, Liam says, is a powerful medium through which we share and discuss our hopes and fears and anxieties about the futures we want to have. This is, again, Liam's quote. I think it was an inspiration to this major, and I think to some of the things that we want to do here at Strelka as well. All of this animates our research program, but we also think that we will be going beyond what we've done before, at least in two ways. First of all, this program is a multi-year collaboration between faculty, the students, the community. It was a sort of dream group of design research that we brought together to work all with different skills and superpowers brought to bear. And I'll introduce each of them one by one in a moment and talk a little bit about their work. And second, that is that we're working in the Russian context, which I'll also talk a bit about in a moment. So, to our theme, our plan. Something has shifted, it seems. We are making new worlds faster than we can keep track of them, and the pace is unlikely to slow. Have our technologies advanced beyond our ability to conceptualize can be perilous. In response, one impulse advised and hopeless. Better instead to invest in emergence, in contingency, to map the new normal for what it is and to shape it toward what it should be. In doing so, we move away from the hybrid in the language of the people is interlaced with sensor networks and information technology is called a smart city. A blockchain is more or less digital money, and so on. Now, in the short term, hybrids may make sense by analogy and suggest continuity, but assembling the familiar less and less, that language of what needs our most acute attention. And so Strelka moves away from hybrid urbanism toward the articulation and design of the new normal. But why is this shift so difficult? And what is the new normal anyway? Or better, what should it be? First of all, the new normal describes more than just technologies. Genomic flows and fundamentalisms, financial melodramas, and paths to globalization full of contradictions and hidden trapdoors. So with what language can we define all this directly? What do words like politics, identity, human, architecture, organic, citizen, home, modern, authentic, progressive, natural, etc., what do these words even mean anymore? Or rather, do their meaning describe what's actually happening? And if not, at what point does the gap between our language and what it needs to explain become so wide that we move on to new terms? If that point is now, then our assignment is also to design a more effective glossary of the present. Can we compose it fast enough? I think the ideal platform to ask and hopefully answer some of these questions as they extend directly into the mission of the Institute to reimagine and refashion the future of Russian cities. And it's this pull between the utopian and the dystopian, the neo-modern and the neo-reactionary, not clear which is always which, this pole of contradictory impulses. This is our context. And so our ideas for Russia's future, and all of ours, draw on this legacy of melancholic utopianism, linking European and Asian passages, Pacific and Baltic flows, with perched, like our common future, between those traditional and hypermodern paths. So what are the most important lessons to be drawn from these contradictions and potencies and potential? As Moscow, its capital, expands its circumference, will it innovate a regional vernacular of sprawl or of interlocking megastructures, or both? And looking north from this northernmost megacity, what future, if any, will we find in the new polar passages? Also, with the New Normal program at Strelka, we also ask how past futurisms might help shape a bolder and more innovative urbanism for Russia and everywhere. And for that, perhaps the lesson is to look up. Across the horizons of its 11 time zones, Russia was the seat of humanity's initial forays into the vertical abyss of space, freeing us from one planetary perch and revealing others from which we can never leave. And so from this legacy of past futurisms, we conclude not that progress is a myth. The myth is that progress is assured. It's not. But progress is always possible. It is perhaps what is always most real. So, to designing the new normal for the challenges of this, even as we take on these toolkit, the attitude with which we organize our research is, once more, not just technological. It is also exploratory, and one because the other. This moment in time, or predicament, it confounds, excites, and inspires both creativity, both demands and resists design. Automation of what? Machine vision of what? Whose artificial intelligence? The future city when? So wading into these questions, the New Normal at Strelka is a speculative urbanism think tank, a platform for the invention and articulation of a new discourse and new models. Students here will be starting in February in residence for 5 months. Our research program is based, as I say, on a longer-term collaboration between faculty and students, local and global experts from varied disciplinary backgrounds, and will extend over at least 2 cohorts, and will produce diverse outcomes. Students will be in residence here, as I say, for this 5, not including the field trip to California, which we'll discuss in a moment. Now, for this, we should say that the speculative in speculative design is not somehow supplemental to the serious work of remaking the city. It's our responsibility in this moment of change and uncertainty. It's only by mapping the new normal and modeling what's possible. Curriculum is structured as a series of intensive modules in which students will engage the urban through both traditional and advanced methodologies. The phases of these modules will focus on core areas of speculative design thinking, cultural analytics, scenario development, projective design. These are in turn based on an intensive engagement with crucial techniques, right, from qualitative data analysis, visualization, contemporary philosophy of technology, design, and aesthetics. So let me then discuss a bit the content of these modules in a bit more detail. The first of which, the new normal, I will be teaching in the month of February. Perhaps what is most normal is also what is most strange. At every moment, seemingly distant and unlike things are linked into one another. Ecological flows become sites. This is from the basis I also say on the book, on the Stack book, which was published. Ecological flows become sites of intensive sensing, quantification, and governance. Challenging the notion that computation is fundamentally virtual. It's also irreducibly physical. Data centers, for example, are incredibly thirsty, having long passed the airline industry in their carbon footprint. And yet, smarter energy systems also require more development and more deployment. Can we build them fast enough to realize those efficiencies, fast enough to save us from the cost of building them? Cloud computing spurs platform economies, creating new virtual geographies in its own image. And in doing so, we see that some contemporary platforms absorb traditional core functions of states and demonstrating for both good and ill new spatial and temporal models for their online publics. Cities form vast discontiguous networks as they weave their borders into enclaves or escape routes. The urban form is then open for redefinition. Some designers, architects, let's say, see software as something added onto space. They see the idea of smart cities as stupid because it assumes that cities are not already intelligent, and they're right. Other designers, programmers, may see cities as modules of hardware that fit together one at a time into that megastructural matrix. And they too are right. And so one mode of design is embedded inside the other. Virtual addressing systems locate familiar maps. Interhuman populate this tangled apparatus increasingly by artificial intelligence, which inspires not a small amount of consternation. The nightmare of AI, as it turns out, may be not one in which the AI wants to be you, perhaps. The next module is pattern recognition, which Lev will talk a bit more about later. Here we explore new techniques of quantitative and qualitative analysis, data visualization, cultural analytics. Design research must first describe and know what it wants to change. But our intuitions can be deceptive. We can't see patterns operating at scales different from our own natural perception and memory. So technologies from writing, calculation, extend and verify our ability to know how things work. That is, we're a pattern recognizing species. That's what we do, but it comes at a price of the false positive and false negative. Even when we know the patterns are false, we can't help but see them. Even when we know they're true, we can't help but not see them sometimes. And so various big data methodologies inform the digital humanities, as cultural analytics shows patterns in human culture and communication that would have been invisible otherwise. And as we become aware of these patterns, they not only describe what we do, but help shape how we do it as well. Lev Manovich, our other speaker this evening, the best person in the world to lead this module, will discuss some of these implications, its history in a bit more detail. We'll then have a series of technical workshops called synthetic sensing to explore the creative potential of various forms of emerging technology. And it's both the technical ability with the tools they're interested in, but their exploration, because we don't know what they're good for yet. And finding out is not just a matter for engineering only. Among these is augmented reality, the techniques and tools for the superimposition of interfacial information directly over a perception of the world, providing for the possibility of both more poetic forms of narrative interaction with urban spaces, and also much more dreary and predictable. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. We'll have to find out. Biosensing tools that expand what we can sense about the city, that live sometimes at the layer of our own skin, but also extending what the city can sense about us and also about itself. 3D scanning and LiDAR systems, which produce data forms which we can reproduce and reconstruct in such a way that we read them as extend both sort of the sensing of our own abilities and of the city's abilities, shift the boundary between the inside and the outside. The human body and its urban habitat is made a bit less certain, more available to exploration in this way. Next is speculative megastructures. Science fiction often anticipates things before they arrive. Fact sometimes follows fiction. The lesson is that we cannot enact another urbanism before we imagine it and before we model it. So this module will explore potential urban futures, from the metabolism of global flows to infrastructural scale robotics, and how we're planning digital cinema. Now, megastructures have a particular role to play in this project of a speculative urbanism because they suggest architecture at an urban scale, or as a global system, or as a total space. Or conversely, an urban system programmed megastructures have long been a genre that invites speculative design. This genre today is Liam Young, whose work draws on many of the same questions. First met Liam at a part of this as part of our study of megasystems that are linked by urban networks of cause and effect that are not so easy to see and measure, will be Keller Easterling. Because we're interested in scenarios of form, yes, but also of protocols. We're looking for mechanisms that may produce, we're all looking for mechanisms that may produce unexpected cause and effect, but perhaps we're measuring all the wrong things. Perhaps our game theories and legal fictions, special zones, are poorly disposed to a zero marginal cost platform economics. If so, as only as exceptions to the rule, instead of reasons to make more new rules, to see new patterns, to recognize a new normal, may only make things worse. The alternative is for design to use its essential craftiness, its cunning, as well as critique, to draw that new normal. Keller Easterling, an architect, an author, brilliant thinker, professor at Yale, will drive this as part of the module. We'll also be taking a trip to California, linking Russian and California cultures of science and design, speculation, engineering, and art. Also to demythologize a bit what makes California special and not special in its own way. We have a bear and a red star too, by the way. Our trip will start in San Diego, where we focus on science and design, take us to Los Angeles with a focus on media design, and up to the Bay Area on software and design. And again, we're interested in a cross-contamination of interest here as well. Our last module is platform design. The design outcomes of the program will mix traditional and emerging forms of design and media to hopefully reset the terms of the urban discussion a bit. And in this, we will learn strategies for the communication of design platforms, incorporating branding, user experience, and narrative, irony, paradox, sleight of hand, to turn audiences into are not reducible to the politics or economics. They have a unique aesthetic logic that makes them work like they do. And so we look then for a new vision of what they can be and how to articulate them, which isn't always so straightforward. Both stating things plainly and telling stories. But how to say these things, more true than true in our post-truth global culture. It's a bit like hiding in plain sight, or what we call steganography, like messages encoding in JPEGs. The practice of concealing messages or information within other non-secret text and data. The very best collaborators we could have for this very special kind of work is the Amsterdam-based design studio Metahaven, Daniel van der Velden, and Vika Krook. Okay, so here's a quick overview of our calendar to date. I should also say that we'll be adding many more faculty, experts, and workshops, so stay tuned. The group that we've sort of discussed this evening is sort of our some of the heavy hitters from the trailer, but we're far from done of working this together. I want to talk a little bit about the students that we'll be working with. The program is invited to apply. The program is designed for programmers, theorists, entrepreneurs, artists who are comfortable with counterintuitive perspectives and who wish to work across scales that combine both conventional and unconventional forms. Over the 3 years of the program, we will also, as I say, work as a kind of virtual collaboration amongst the faculty as a discontiguous design research studio that comes together here in Moscow for short periods of time before going back to vanquish bad guys in other parts of the world as well. We'll talk quickly about some of the outcomes that we hope to develop here. First, the students will be, we can think about the kinds of work the students do in terms of 3 kinds of models. Descriptive models, the models that describe the world as it is, and perhaps in ways in which we wouldn't have expected to understand it. Predictive models that allow us to anticipate what is most likely to happen. And prescriptive models to anticipate what we think should happen. I think design sometimes gets confuses the descriptive, predictive, and projective or prescriptive capacities of its modeling. And we want to do so with a bit more care. So what kinds of students? Something people have asked me in the last few days. We're interested in students from a very wide range of backgrounds, not only architects and urban, students with architecture and urban background. We're interested in students who may have a degree of expertise, even virtuosity in a particular field, but are in a way frustrated by the limitations of that field. Want to take the work that they do and expand it into something that is more creative, projective, urbanistic. The students should have a comfortable relationship with ambiguity. Sometimes design works to reduce ambiguity, to produce the one true answer. And if the world were to remain stable, then the outcome of design research to guarantee that answer may be worth leaning on. But if you think that the world is changing, then ambiguity, in a way, is your friend. It's the only way in which we can explore and map the space of possibilities and anticipate and plan for what may come. And also on the sort of the ambiguity, the kinds of design research that we're looking for are ones in a way that we're not always so sure whether the projects that we come up with are ones that would point us toward the utopian end of the spectrum or the dystopian end of the spectrum. If we're certain that the project is good or bad, in a way it's not interesting design research. We're looking for projects in a way that challenge even our own thinking in this regard. In a nutshell, we're looking for students who see technology as the basis of a creative practice and see creativity as the basis of a technological practice. In essence, then, we're looking for students who are interested in designing a new kind of design practice. In the 20th century, the core skills by which design education was based, graphic design, interaction design, these are all still as worthwhile as they ever were, which in and of themselves are challenges to our theoretical and philosophical thought. It's not really one or the other, though. We're interested in who can combine. We're interested in developing, as I told Vavara when we first met, something like a Strelka school of thought. When I say that we need a new glossary, a new vocabulary to describe the new normal, it's really, in a way, what I hope will be one of the most important outcomes of the program in this way. And to the ambiguity, we're interested in people who may not fit into regular categories, whose their own interests may at first seem contradictory, but at closer inspection really hit the target. The types of projects that will emerge from this will be ones that we recognize as conventional architecture and urban projects, and ones that we don't. Ones that actually may engage publics, engage the real world, engage real cities, and more importantly, engage the cities to come in ways that can really matter. Last word then on designing in relation to constraints. Arguably, design does its best work not in relation to tabula rasa, blank page, the white cube, but in reaction to emergencies that demand that conventional practices cannot stand, and that we simply have to find new ways. And in this, the most unusual path may prove to be also the most practical. Now, we may take an emergency to mean a state of exception, or we may take it to mean a kind of emergence, a new normal. We place our bets with emergence, and we have many emergencies. Take your pick. For one, our shared ecological emergency cannot be solved by naive appeals to quote-unquote nature or simplistic notions of sustainability, as if everything can change and everything can stay the same at the same time. Instead, we dive into the messy and weird planetary biochemistry in which and of which we swim. Or if you like, design confronts emergencies of allegiance, alignment, organization. Because power never only exists, it's always also a matter of presentation and storytelling. But to say so does not also mean that its effects are somehow not real, felt, visceral, direct. And so our new normal works towards universal values, yes, but a universality that is not tied to the local modernity of the West only, rather actually universal. Or design may address an emergency of our networks of finance, value, exchange. What is actually worth what? To whom and when? How much value is there in the world, and why? So, by all means, pick your emergency and design with what makes it emergent. We do so not because the future is not. So after Buckman, it will be touch and go up until the last moment. So to see things new, to see them for what they really are, in all their marvelous strangeness, both beautiful and ugly, will require both our most powerful technology and our most intense and adventurous imagination. The future is where we will live and grow, but first we need to catch up to the present. Thank you. It's my pleasure now, as Olga mentioned, to introduce the second speaker, my friend Lev Manovich. Olga gave him a bit of an introduction to the many books that he's written, the projects of the Software Studies Initiative. I'll just say that add a more personal point to this as well. This is when we beginning to talk to Strelka about the possibility of coming here. Lev was the first person I called to ask him what he thought, whether this was going to be a good idea, because in a certain sense, whether Lev agreed to be part of the program or not was a kind of a condition of whether I would agree to be part of the program, at least for me. Lev convinced me to come to UC San Diego, to La Jolla, many years ago. I, in turn, managed to convince him to come to Strelka, though, as it turns out, he didn't actually need any convincing at all. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce the second speaker, Lev Manovich.
I don't see any slides. So, I don't know. Maybe you have to get. Я буду говорить по-английски, вот, но можем общаться, естественно, на русском, вот, используя Facebook, Twitter, Live Journal даже. То есть пишите по-русски. So in my talk, I will be brief. I think Benjamin kind of covered it all. I can't think of a better person to lead us and Strelka towards design of new design practices. So what I want to do is try to make a connection to history of modern art and culture and the contributions of Russian architects, designers, filmmakers, writers, theorists. Because geopolitics, cybernetics, probability theory, and so on is perhaps another axis which we have to keep in mind, in which we students who will be studying here will be studying in Moscow, right? Not in Oslo, not in Vladivostok, not in Seoul. So we want them somehow think about it and become like the best Russians we can be. So normally when we think about history of modernism, modern art, design, architecture, we don't realize that to a large extent the so-called modernism was in fact invention of new languages for new media. So this is one of the most important technologies of 20th century. It's a Leica camera introduced in 1925, which was the first portable 35mm camera. And the person holding it is a famous British writer, Bernard Shaw. So as soon as the Leica come out, few photographers, such as Maholy-Nash, Professor Bauhaus, and our owner, Alexander Rodchenko, realized that we can invent new media language using this camera. And here, of course, some most iconic and celebrated photographs where Rodchenko, using a small camera, is able to create new vision. Right? He's able to recognize new patterns because he can get to things very close. He can point camera to the sky. He can photograph from a building. So here's one new media result of technology from 1925. So another, of course, a person we have to mention is Zig Vertov. In his famous image from man movie camera, we have a kind of prediction of computer vision. We have prediction of Google AI about 90 years before. And what Vertov is doing is inventing new language of cinema, a particular new language of cinema, right? Using the technology of cinema, right? So special points of view. So again, it's a new media from 1929 to he invented modern graphic design. And if you look at your t-shirts or your bags, or designs around us, we are still in this language, right? We're still in people like Ladovsky, Ginsberg, the Snin brothers, and others, which develop a new language of architecture, which of course visually, spatially has a lot in common with the language of, again, modernist geometric abstraction. In the same time, it's new technology of what? Reinforced concrete, right? So reinforced concrete meets geometric abstraction, and you get these iconic buildings. Right? So, of course, I can also have many examples from Europe, but since we're in Moscow, I chose Muscovites, right? Because many of them have pioneered the culture in which we live in, spatial, visual, and information culture. Okay, so now we realize that this term new media, right, is not something which only should be applied to 1990s, our time. In fact, Jota was a new media artist, right? Piranesi was new media architect, right? With the history of culture is invention of new languages based on new technological possibilities. So in 1999, I published an article, which in fact I wrote over a few days, almost exactly like this month, in August of 99, which was called provocatively avant-garde software. In this article, I was trying to understand what is the connection of new media of the 1990s, like internet, World Wide Web, virtual reality, also things which you don't remember but which were very big, like CD-ROMs, electronic books. This modernist avant-garde. So what I proposed in this article is that the old media avant-garde of 1920s, and you just saw examples, came up with new forms new ways to represent reality, and new ways to see the world. The new media avant-garde, again, writing about 1990s, is about new ways of accessing and manipulating information. Its techniques are hypermedia, databases, search engines, data mining, image processing, visualization, and simulation. So now, 17 years later, to me it feels completely right. The only thing is that hypermedia, maybe I will strike it out, and I would add data mining, I would add data science, and neural networks, but it's basically the same thing. Right? So the only difference, the fundamental difference between now, 2016, and 1999, is that this new media of the 90s were about interactivity, were about new organization of space and time, websites, VR, but the scale was still relatively small. Right? So what happens in 2000s is we have emerged with data about human behaviors, whether it is Instagram, Contact, Twitter, Viber, so on, or high-resolution satellites, with data about cars or data from fitness monitors. Like the explosion of data, we now have about cities and human behaviors, and in parallel with the development of new forms of artificial intelligence, which allow us on a single laptop to download, process, and analyze this data. Right? So basically what I want students to learn here is precisely this, right? Understand how new ways of accessing and manipulating and analyzing information is in fact something which every architect, designer, and urban theorist have to think about. So just a couple of more, this is also a quote from this article. The new avant-garde is no longer concerned with seeing or representing a world in new ways, but rather with accessing and using new ways previously accumulated media. In this respect, new media is a kind of post-media, meta-media that uses old media as a primary material. So I think this made lots of sense in 1999, but maps which exist. Right? The maps which we have with cities show us things from above, from some kind of panopticon satellite point of view. Well, guess what? There are 10 or 15 million people, depending on how you count in Moscow. Every one of them has a different internal psychological map of a city, and we already have data which allows us now to create millions of these maps. So how do we go from replacing one map of Moscow, which may show infrastructure, to having millions of maps which represent a kind of view of a city of every individual, every tourist, and how do we use this new form of multidimensional mapping to create new design practice? Okay. So now we recognize that some images are the same, because I came to CSD as a professor of digital art in 1996, and then Benjamin joined us about 15 years later, and both me and him have research labs in this amazing institution called California Institute for Telecommunication Information, which is in the upper right. And here are some of the same technologies, except I'm also showing these walls, which people started to construct there. And when I saw one of these walls, so it's a kind of data visualization wall made from many monitors in 2005, this was the moment when I started to think about cultural analytics. I said, okay, so we have scientists showing us stars or neurons in the brain, and there are many, many of them to visualize, to understand, let's say, all design websites in the world. And that was even before social media, right? This new canvas to start thinking about the possibility of seeing in new dimensions and be able to understand both global cultural flows in real time. And guess what? A few years later, we now have a category called dashboards, right? It's exactly, it happened. And also be able to substitute our objective, so-called objective, right? Perception of a city by multitudes of subjective perceptions, because ultimately the city is not about the roads, the city is about people who live here. And every one of us sees the city differently. Yeah. So one of the projects we created recently in my lab called On Broadway. So what we decided is not only use Instagram, but to use a number of different data layers about the city. And we used about 30 million data points and images to represent a single street, right? So 30 million data points and images to represent the single street, and we can use 30 billion images, right? 30 million data points. Because once you start thinking about the city as a data city, it has infinite depth. So in this project, we use Instagram, Foursquare, Twitter, Income, and Taxi. And this spike you see is the single most important tourist landmark, which is Times Square. Okay? So here is just a list of the data sources we used. So for example, 22 million taxi rides, which people took along Broadway in 2013, before Uber. And we tried to basically to represent the city without maps, instead make a kind of Napoleon cake, right? Set of layers, where the data, in fact, takes the second part. So this is with dots, which represent the data values, such as the average, how many tweets, how many taxi rides, how many Foursquare check-ins are in this block every day. And the images, Google Street View images, right? Instagram images are the primary kind of citizens to make image-centric representation. And this is what I've been doing the last few days. We are now running a workshop in St. Petersburg where we collected almost 500,000 Instagram photos, which we shared in St. Petersburg over 1 year, in 2014 and 2015. It's a kind of rehearsal for Strelka class, right? So basically trying to work all the kinks. So we have 36 students, almost the same number from 10 countries. We're working very talented young person, who some of you maybe met, Demiana Cerone. And this is just me in my hotel room, resting after visiting all the anti-cafes in St. Petersburg, and basically mapping locations of Instagram photos separated by months to see what are different patterns of sharing, right? Different patterns of activity in different months. And then we also collected 800,000 Instagram photos, which we shared over 1 year in Moscow. And this will be one of many, many data layers I'm hoping the students will use. And I just wanted to kind of prepare this. So what you have is selected. So each line is the hashtags, which particular user assigned to his or her Instagram photo. So I basically put some random ones. And I also did search for Strelka. It was very easy, right? So again, each line is imagine image, and this is user hashtags. So the first one was garage или park, выставка современного искусства. And the third one was Strelka Summer Creative Mornings. Come on. But my favorite one is this one. Я хочу есть всегда. Покормите меня, Strelka бар, бар Strelka. Now, what of course I've done is I copied selected fields, made pretty slide. And this is how 1% of the data looks like it. How do you know it's 1%? You see this bar on the right. So you see so this is in fact zooming out of the data. And this is actually my kind of my almost last slide, going back to the idea of pattern recognition. So what we have today, right, not only an amazing amount of data, which potentially we should use to throw away all the maps and make something new, but we also have computers. We have new forms of AI called machine learning. So the students are going to learn about supervised machine learning, unsupervised machine learning, and where the computers can look at these billions of images, or billions of data points, or billions of spatial traces, and see patterns. But it's not so easy. So some of you perhaps heard about computer vision, right? Every time you take a picture, your camera automatically makes it very perfect. The Facebook automatically recognizes faces of your friends. So over the last 5 years, because of machine learning, talking about serendipity, there has been lots of progress in computers being able to recognize image content. So we can basically, before the workshop will start, before my class will start, we'll run latest. We started already running kind of Google state-of-the-art image recognition system, and we thought great. So now we're going to know, here's all pictures of Moscow of cute dogs, and here's people with Monocle magazine. Here's people with полное собрание сочинений Горького, and so on, right? But it turns out the computer doesn't give you answer. The computer gives you more big data. Right? So this is, again, very, very small, right, subset of results running Google Vision API on 50,000 images from St. Petersburg, and what you see, and then what you have, right, is the string notation. This is the result you get from Google Vision API. So this is state-of-the-art pattern recognition, right? So a computer doesn't tell you, oh, that's my boyfriend. Oh, this is my professor from Marquis. Oh, I was taking a bicycle ride with a friend in Izmailovsky Park. No, the computer gives the probabilities. So there's no. The second one, we have cosplay with probability 0.52, clothing probability 0.97, costume 7.9, and so on. So this itself requires representation. So to conclude, one of many other things we have to teach students is how to use the system intelligently, because the computers don't give you answers, we actually give you more questions. So I want to teach students how to think as a so much.
Okay, so now we take. У нас есть буквально 2 минуты, мы поставим стулья для того, чтобы можно было делать дискуссию. Поэтому, пожалуйста, не уходите. So we took like 2 minutes to manage the scene. Great. And we can start wherever you are.
Oh, we're chatting or?
Chat a bit. I can. You want me to stick mic? It's working. You want me to stick mic instead? Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Good. So we'll chat a little bit. A few things came to mind. Your talk is at a point of parallels where some of the things that we're working on. First is the way in which starting this idea that by asking questions of these systems, we really just get more questions back. What we might say that during the period of the Enlightenment a few centuries ago, useful data and information was something that science had to sort of coax out of the world. It was rare. When we found it, we wrote it down, we put it in books, we built buildings around the books, we built universities around the libraries and so forth and so on. And now we have the opposite, this fire hose, drinking from the fire hose problem, where we have so much data that when we try to ask something of the data, we only get more data back and more data back and more data back. And so we need pictures of the data to find it. And I was really struck by this term that I don't know how deliberate it is, this idea of what you called image-centric representation. One of the other things we talked about sort of at the beginning was the idea was, since most of these, this is data, or this is data that we're looking at, as something that looks like an image for us, because we like pictures, whether or not in a few years we would still call these images anymore.
We make data anthropomorphic. Well, so I have two very brief responses. Right, first, the idea that we have lots of data, we don't have any data. Look, we started mapping Instagram images in St. Petersburg. Once you go outside the center and few sleeping neighborhoods, there's nothing. Right? We just took a ride in the Uber from Izmailovsky. Architectural layers from 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, right? You have cultural layers from 80s, 90s, and so on, right? So in fact, what we have is a lot, but also what we have is nothing. Okay? But we have to start getting ready, and we have to learn to recognize what we have, when what we have is useful, and how we can go out, take our own pictures, talk to people, right, and not simply rely on the data just because there's lots of it.
No, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm interested also on the, one of the things that strikes me is about machine vision in general. It's peculiar, I imagine it's sort of peculiar that we even call it vision in a certain sense. I mean, we have machines that can sense light, and they construct data about the light that we reproduce as image in a particular way. And I wonder whether or not how long we'll continue to call it vision in this way. But one of the things that is how it is that the kind of self-portraits that we individually or as populations, as groups, or at the entire city, the strangeness, I guess, of seeing ourselves through the eyes of this other kind of mechanism, creature. There's something uncanny about the kind of portraitures that we get back from this.
Yeah. Well, so what I would say, based on my experience, I basically first learned about computer vision as a graduate student in NYU in 86, so 30 years ago. And now we've been working a lot with, better and better systems from Yahoo, Google, and so on. And what strikes me is that, yes, it's bizarre, middle class, conventional, because, we're starting to design with algorithms, so they can be used by business. So we started running the Google Vision API on these images. It turns out it's very good recognizing particular models of cars.
Or dog faces.
Yeah, Zeal 5. But it can't recognize poetry, it can't recognize clouds, it can't recognize, buildings which look of knowledge which is constructed for very particular purposes, military, commercial, and so on. So in a way, it's like as though you hire a person who's not like you. In fact, you hate this person, and instead this person do research, and this person brings back with strange labels.
Yeah, well, I guess that's exactly it. It's what's interesting about it is not that it's bad at seeing the good and mechanism in ways in which we never would have thought possible. There's something quite alien about it that I find sort of quite interesting as well. Anyway, we can go on and on with sort of this as well. The more interesting part of the evening will always be the discussion that we have with you and the Q&A. So I'd like if we have the other microphones and the rest, that we might open up this discussion a bit, and if there's other questions or topics that we can.
Well, it's Moscow, so of course we're going to have 10 people lining up with great questions. That's what happens every time I'm here, but maybe it's Sunday, and people are getting nervous that we have to go take our children to school on the 1st, and let's see.
Okay. So basically, we have 3 people with the microphones, so you just raise your hand. Можете просто поднять руку, к вам подойдут девушки с микрофонами. Вы можете говорить на русском, на английском. Если вы говорите, мы вас переведем. И мы можем дать... у нас есть уже headphones, поэтому кто первый, если есть вопрос?
We have translations.
Okay, can you ask the first personal question? What is basically what you're trying to achieve when you say that there will be a new language that we're trying to get? What is your maybe personal interest in that?
Because we can say new things with a new language, I think is what it is simple as comes down to. Like I said, we call these things images. They are images, they're also data. There's a certain point at which calling them images just doesn't help us anymore. When so many new things appear, we can't, the kind of poetry that we can write, the kinds of sentences that we write, the kinds of ideas about them that it's possible to have, to communicate, is held back if we don't have the language and the vocabulary for doing so. And so I mean, in a certain sense, literally new words, new capacities for this. The opposite of reducing the glossary, of making everything double good, has the opposite effect. It's because it would be possible to imagine the way out of this predicament. Quite so, because what we can compose with it. Yeah.
So maybe I can add something. So I think one of Benjamin's amazing slides, right, where he had list of things, he said pick any 3.
Is what?
You had plus astronomy, right, or data mining, plus architecture, plus Tolstoy study. I said, programming. He said, of course not. I mean, it will be very successful. Sorry. So basically, deprofessionalize. We're going to make professional amateurs, professional explorers, right? People who can learn dozens of fields enough to use them.
We need the biotech Tolstoy urbanism, but we need a better word for it because it's just way too long.
Okay, so we make it also shorter.
Perhaps, yeah.
Do we have questions? Okay, great.
Да. У меня вот такой вопрос. Значит, вы проговорили такую вещь о том, что, значит, нам нужно читать научную фантастику для того, чтобы представлять себе будущее. Насколько я помню, тот же Ролан Бартон у себя в мифологиях говорил о том, что научная фантастика, она не описывает будущее, она работает с теми как раз вот структурами, которые у нас уже есть сейчас. Она их просто, в определенном смысле переносит в некоторое будущее, но в любом случае описывает то, что уже и так стало нормой. Он тоже об этом же говорит, о том, что в своем «Черном лебеде», о том, что ни черта подобного не работает. И мы знаем огромное количество историй про то, что то, что является прорывным, то, что мы потом назовем неким будущее, вот оно пришло сейчас рядом с нами, да, всякие те же мобильные телефоны, которых 25 лет назад тому не было, тем более мы не думали о том, что мы будем тыкать пальцами в экран. Всего этого, условно, грубо говоря, в научной фантастике нет. Очень мало примеров, когда мы можем сказать, вот научная фантастика что-то предсказала, и вот это появилось. Даже те же самые роботы, да, которых нам так много обещали, они все еще не на той стадии, про которую можно было бы сказать, хей, вот у нас есть роботы. То есть, не кажется ли вам, что это несколько сильное преувеличение? Можно?
I'm just waiting for the rest of the translation. So I think we, if I get the gist of your question, I think we both agree and disagree. I will say that the way in which the value of science fiction, especially science fiction that is describing and working with the future, about the future, is both because it can and cannot do that. As I've said, in our society, putting things into the future, describing scenarios into the future is a bit of a alibi. It's a way of, instead of saying in a land far, far away or once upon a time, it allows for a bracketing and deference that exactly describes the present in ways in which we may not have done so before. And so on the one hand, I agree that isn't science fiction really just describing the present in a different way? Yes, and that's precisely the value that we may have for it, in that it's doing so by, in a way, asking what if this is extrapolated further? What if this is Barth did? I think that its interest in, as a populist utopian and dystopian discourse, I think that Frederick Jameson, for example, has a more useful literary critical relationship to science fiction in this way. The way in which we are interested in science fiction is not as I say, in these three kinds of models of descriptive, predictive, and projective. We're not only interested in science fiction as a predictive model, that in the future there will be talking about the now in a way in which we would otherwise be unable to do, and also as a projective model, as narratives about what perhaps should be or shouldn't be, not to predict them, but to make arguments that are both that are normative and even ethical about these in this way. And like any genre, there's both good versions and bad versions of this as well. But I hope that the claims that we are making around science fiction, both the kinds of science fiction that we're familiar with and perhaps the ones that we're not as familiar with, are seen in this light.
You talked today about the information, the data. So do you think that the new normal in the future will be related to this wisdom?
Wisdom.
Yeah. Because if we can imagine the pyramid, that the data, as Lev said, if you compare, will be the new era, will be the era of wisdom, or just the era of information which many people will accumulate.
I think I take the point, and I think Lev would agree in a way that simply by increasing the quantity of information that we may have in a sort of way, that this doesn't necessarily tell us anything true or more importantly, to your point, I think significant about anything that we want to find. on the question of wisdom, I suppose it depends on how we might define a kind of deeper understanding of the patterns of the world, of cause and effect, of what to do and what not to do, that go beyond our immediately intuitive way of dealing with the problem. And I think that in a way, almost all of the ways in which we might point to real knowledge of the world have been ways of defeating or getting past at least our intuitive ways of seeing the world. That the earth is flat, that the sun goes around the earth, that it was created in 7 days, whatever. The ways in which we might normally think of it. We have invented and developed in fits and starts and stops, up and down, technologies of cognitive extension that have allowed us to get around those intuitive ways, to see those patterns and to understand those patterns so that we might see the world as it really is and what we might do. I think the big data techniques, the epistemological value, that when in the best sense are ones that also allow us to get around or evade our intuitive, the limitations of our intuitive understandings of cause and effect. To see not just deeper into the fabric of things, but also to see before, both individually and collectively at once. And so, if you're asking me if in no way is that built into the technology. In no way is that a feature.
Which people derived historically because we didn't have computers. You know, we have a computer, we give it millions of variables, it calculates the result, not based on some idea, this is how you make a smart city, this is how you make a beautiful city. It calculates particular decision for every city, for every block, right? It's not knowledge in traditional sense, right? So that's, for example, what I'm talking about, right? So this idea of let's have like a guidebook, how to make perfect cities, you know, garden cities, so this and that. That's like 1900 idea, all right? The computer doesn't need this. The computer can create very, very custom scenarios, right? Which are unique, which we will never understand how it's doing it, and we just have to trust it, or not.
Benjamin, my question to you. You mentioned that in University of San Diego you had the faculty of design and geopolitics, if I understood correctly.
I'm sorry, one more time?
In University of San Diego you had the faculty of design and geopolitics, right?
This is my research laboratory, yes.
Research laboratory.
Yeah.
So for me this combination is like pretty new, pretty fresh, and I wonder how you combine these two things, design and geopolitics, and how one influences the other.
Well, we're interested in ways that, I guess the simple answer to, not so simple, but the direct answer to the question is a lot of what the book, The Stack on Software and Sovereignty is addressing. One of the key arguments that I make in the book is that for both good and bad, one of the effects of planetary scale computation is a shifting in political geographies, in how publics are produced, that in some ways challenges the jurisdictions of the traditional Westphalian state. You think of Treaty of Westphalia, sort of a horizontal map of the earth, everything divided into little loops. This is late 17th century, and it was a design solution to a particular way of organizing space, geography, and sovereignty. It's one that's not going anywhere, by the way. But the way in which we look at this is not just saying that, okay, we have these computer networks, somehow the state is being virtualized away, disappearing. It's, in fact, in interesting ways, maybe the opposite, in that maybe what we see is not a virtualization of borders, but a multiplication of borders. Not just one map, but a map and another map and another map and another map, all on top of one another, all making some kind of total claim on that space, and that each of us, any site or person or data flow in a way, is being claimed by multiple maps, multiple geographies at the same time. And that instead of seeing these thickened layers of vertical, that it's not just that we're not just something we have to recognize, just only to describe, but that it's something that once we recognize, we can then transform. We can then make decisions about how it is that we may want these questions to work. And so, the book is the longer argument about about this topic. The other side of it is simply that the argument that design needs to also understand its ramifications at a global make and how they get made and the systems in which they're located are not only about the relationship between one user and one object. That user-centered design of this person and this thing and how do they go together, this is just a tiny sliver of what design is about, and that its claims can be and must be much larger because its implications are much larger. Is that the work that the students develop at the beginning, the work that they will further develop in the second module, which becomes the base, a bit like a large project would in a design studio, from a discovery phase to a prototype phase. A lot of the work, the methodologies, the speculative design driven, and so the work that students may do even in a technical workshop to one of the larger studios may be part located within the scenarios that we begin to develop. But the plan, the system, is that it will in a way all add up by the end into a mosaic of work that will include the types of things that students would do in a traditional architectural design studio, and many other things besides. And so it is a design Strelka KB might be doing, and when what we mean by what is practical in this way. The students will absolutely be working with real, making real things. It won't only be seminar driven, but the outcomes will be research based in this way, and also, as I say, based on many technical skills that will be in the basis of those kinds of design practices that students will be developing.
Yeah, I just want to add that we try to talk perhaps a bit abstractly about our visions, but definitely the students will be exposed to and taught a range of practical skills.
By all means, yes, of course.
Right. I mean, as much or as little as you can learn in a few weeks. So in my case, we will work on particular data sets, which me and my lab started to collect. We'll be working behind the scenes between now and June. Our students will be introduced to artificial intelligence. We will learn how to read latest articles in fields we don't understand, and both as a big group project, but perhaps we'll also have smaller projects. Like in my case, I will do everything I can to work with students to produce something which will result in publications and websites where everybody gets credit, and I promise to you we'll do something nobody has done before, because I don't want Russia to simply say, oh great, we're now as good as the country X, right? I mean, that's something else happened in 1913, 1916. So as opposed to trying to copy others, let's jump over, right? Let's do something nobody else has done, because look at the amazing history we have. So there's going to be practical outputs, which we're hoping.
Hi, Benjamin.
Hello.
Hi, Lev. Thank you for introduction, the new program. It's very exciting, I would say. I have more personal question to you. What kind of motto do you have in your life?
Model?
Motto.
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 Motto,
Motto, what kind
Like,
of motto?
for example, Skolkovo has a motto, be in trend. So what's our motto? Okay. Make trends, right, for example. Or compete with trends, right? Something a bit more different.
My motto. I don't know. Motto. I used the motto for the title of another book that I published also this year, which was a book of fictions. And the title of this book was called Dispute Plan to Prevent Future Luxury Constitution, which I'll break down a bit, which it's actually more direct than it sounds. in the 1990s, I was traveling in Indonesia, and at this time there was a lot of these just strange English T-shirts and stuff everywhere. And we found this jacket. It looked like a kind of like motorcycle bomber jacket, and it had this amazing logo on the back with this flaming bird and this stuff, and it had this phrase all the way around: dispute plan to prevent future luxury constitution. And I thought, that's actually quite perfect. So the idea of a luxury constitution would be some kind of political system guaranteed based on the principle of luxury, a constitution that guarantees future luxury that from future luxury constitution. That would be my motto.
So my motto, I'm going to borrow from very well known, not only Soviet but a kind of Eastern Bloc communist countries competition from 70s and 80s, which in Russian was делай с нами, делай как мы, делай лучше нас. Okay? So do with us, do like we, do better. And my second motto is: the world is super, hyper, meta complex. Don't try to simplify it. Deal with complexity.
And variety.
No.
Thanks.
So, any other questions? No. Thank you so much. Let's applause to our, not guests, actually, like owners of the program. And я повторю, что если у вас есть план подаваться к нам, то apply-to-strelka.com — это сайт, на который вам надо зайти, прочитать все про всю программу, которая там есть, про все модули подробнее и заполнить заявку до 6 ноября. И также, если вы хотите пересмотреть это видео, которое сегодня записывали, или послать кому-то, то это будет также доступно на сайте. Thank you so much. If you want to apply for Strelka, you can do it on the apply-to-strelka.com till 6th of November. And wish you good luck on that.